Hey, welcome back to my YouTube channel. This is Yvonne Wakefield. That's the name I write under. We're still reading from Babe in the Woods, the first book in the 3-book series on the life I have up at this log cabin I built when I was 18. So the last chapter I read was chapter 7, and it talks about how I get to the Valley of John Day, how I meet this cantankerous baker named Emery at his cafe, and how I find the judge who lets me rent his old rat shack of a cabin, which I stayed in while I was building the cabin. So chapter 8, we're going to learn a little bit more about Jim. I just found Jim, the man who helped me build, who taught me everything. So chapter 8 is the man who buttered his boots. 2 days after I meet Jim at his place, I meet him down at Emery's, just to make sure Emery sees I got the right man. Jim sips a glass of water, looking out of place in this restaurant with fluorescent lights. We review the hand-drawn map I've given him, and Jim gives me his promise to meet me at the old cabin 3 days later at 8 a.m. sharp. The appointed morning tries to dawn through thick gray clouds, fat with rain falling down sharp and straight as the evergreens grow up. I run clean out of containers to catch water dripping through the roof. By 8, the rain settles down to wet, sleety fists, duking it out with the sky not fighting back hard enough to clear. I huddle close to the stove box, shivering, waiting for Jim, who I doubt will show up because of the storm. I am sitting there 2 hours later, still wrapped in the sleeping bag, having given up on him. Even with a 4-wheel drive, which Jim doesn't have, the only rig to succeed on these roads, running in torrents of water, snow, slush, and mud, would have amphibious attached to the name. Hiking in this stuff would be misery. Over the pitter-patter on the roof and the ping-ping of rain in pans and rusty tin cans I found behind the outhouse, I hear a high-pitched whistle and then a long hootie. I open the door to see Jim bouncing across the bridge through a sheet of rain. "Morning, boss." Water drips off his beard, the brim of his hat. He sets down the chainsaw and axe that he has shouldered for over 2 miles, and he puts it outside the door. "I didn't think you were coming because of this rain." I wave my hand to the sky and invite him in. "Rain's not a problem. It's keeping dry in the rain." I look down at his leather boots. Water beads off the toes. Jim takes off his hat and thick gray wool shirt and shakes them before he enters the dank cabin. "Where are your boots?" He looks down at the Minnetonka moccasins I wear because they're only things that I have that are dry. I nod behind the stove. Jim picks up my soggy hiking boots, sticks his fingers inside. "Soaked clean through," he says, placing them down on the stove like a sirloin flank. Then we get down to discussing the cabin I plan to build. Between ideas and approximation, he tends my boots, flipping them like barbecue before the Vibram soles sear. Wisely, he's left the rubber snowmobile boots to dry alone behind the stove. By the time the rain lets up a bit, my plans are pretty much outlined. A 1-room cabin with a loft, and my hiking boots are hot to the touch. Jim heads to the door and extracts 2 yellow squares from his jacket pockets. He peels off the paper backing, picks up my warm boots one at a time, and glides melting butter pats around the seams. I lace up my buttery boots and throw on a dry parka while Jim pulls on his damp wool shirt. We hike half a mile along the creek, cut to the left, and tramp through the snow up an old logging road to my property. Thick rain clouds have drained to cirrus wisps, and the sun appears through the gauzy sky. Jim shoulders his chainsaw and axe. I carry a hatchet and that bow saw with a mind of its own. It has only been a week since my first attempt as a feller, and the nick across my brow is healing nicely. With warm feet and a good man at my side, I feel a confidence bright as the sun that decides to reluctantly shine on my first day at work. What had been icy rain at the old cabin turned to snow 500 feet higher, and my little tent, still pitched by the creek, is caked in chunks melting apart under a warm and welcoming light. "Kind of cold to be camping." Jim looks around at my campsite, a flat spot where we can figure and talk. I think back on the first night, and I still can't warm that chill out of my bones, even a week later as I focus on the opening above the campsite. That's where I want to build, I point my chopper mitten. Jim turns and walks towards the slope. By the time I've caught up with him, he has worn a circle in the snow. Good of a place as any. You can start by cutting down these trees. He swings his arm in an arc. We hunch on our heels in the shadow of trees that will soon become walls on this north-facing slope. We draw building diagrams with pine twigs in fresh powder and talk about light, height, and length, post and pier, saddle notch, butt end. Terms and concepts I've never heard until Jim brings them up. Say these are your corners. He pokes 4 twigs to form a rectangle in the snow. See the shadows? I nod at the blue tapered fingers cast behind each twig. Then this is how the sun would be in your cabin at this time of year. In the summer when it's higher in the east, your cabin would get the most sun on this side. Jim pushes and pauses thoughtfully, tilts his head back, squints at the sun and says, lunchtime. He unbuttons the breast pocket of one shirt layered under another thicker shirt and pulls out a small package wrapped in a square of grocery sack. Would you like some? Jim smiles, breaks what appears in size and texture like a dirty kitchen sponge. He hands me half, the first of many such pieces of bread Jim and I will share. Bread I will learn to bake from grains I hand mill and bake in a Dutch oven on top of a wood cook stove. Bread so wholesome, it is best eaten by itself and chewed with consideration. We eat in silence. Jim smooths the brown paper wrapping across his thighs, folds and places it back in his pocket, signaling it's time to get back to work. He stands, breaks off a nearby evergreen branch, and jabs it into the snowy hillside, then walks over to his chainsaw. As long as I drag this thing along, best to use it. He picks up the machine and walks into the forest. I leave my bow saw and axe behind and follow him, remembering the first and last time I came this close to a man and his chainsaw. Down slope from our lunch spot, Jim stops, looks, puts his arms up around a tree and arches his neck as if he's waiting to get kissed. This way you determine if the tree is crooked or bowed. Try it. Jim releases his grip, steps aside. I walk up to that same tree, stretch out my arms, tilt my head, and give it a hug. My arms too short for a near full embrace. I eyeball upward for any slightward curve. Snow plops down from a branch above and hits me in the kisser. I think this will do, I spit, giving Jim the okay. He grabs a saw, yanks it to a start. From a safe distance, I watch him cut a perfect V, kick out the wedge, saw a back slice, accurate to the T. He points to indicate the direction the tree will fall, and it does precisely as he planned. He leaves the saw running, moves to the next tree, looks up, steps back, nods to me. I nod back, okay. And he saws a second tree. In the time it took me to cut 1 2-inch gash with a bow saw in one tree, Jim fells 8. Want to give it a try? He turns off the saw and then hands it to me. Even with my foot braced on the handle, I can't jerk life into that machine. Jim reaches down, picks up the saw, and with one sharp pull, gets it growling. Here. He holds out the snarling beast. I turn the casing so the blade is perpendicular to the tree, squeeze the throttle, and press the bar against the bark as I've watched Jim do. It ricochets back. My stomach jumps into my heart and my throat runs dry. This machine scares the life out of me. Put some weight into it, Jim yells. A safe distance from the bar, I yield, but cannot yield. The bar keeps jumping back until I get it to bite. Halfway through the undercut, my arms noodle out. I can't do it. I yell over my shoulder, the saw blade wedged in the cut. Jim takes the saw and easily finished what I started. a paradigm that will rarely be inverted as long as we work together. Before he leaves, Jim has felled 14 trees and he shows me how to limb them with his axe. In a single whack, he severs a 2-inch thick branch clean. Keep your blade close to the trunk. The less knobs, easier it is to skin them later. I follow my teacher, but instead of an axe, I use my hatchet. Thunk! The head sticks. My arms twang and reverberate. I jiggle it loose and chop, chop, chop. Hack, chop, hack, chop. And finally, mercilessly cut through one branch. Takes some getting used to. Might want to try an axe instead. Jim walks over to the branch he has poked into the snow. Hatchet in hand, I follow and stand next to him, staring down at it. He pushes the branch further into the snow. You come back here in the morning, then around noon, see where the shadows fall. The next day, move the branch again. Jim points around the slope. You want to find a place where one side of it gets the most sun for the longest time after sunrise. That's where you want to build. Jim gathers his saw and axe. I shoulder the bow saw and swing my hatchet as we talk down the mountain, parting where the road bends. See you in 3 days, boss. He hands me a scrap of grocery sack with penciled notes and drawings. As I watch him crest the hillside, I think if Dessalines twisted free of his pedestal, threw on a plaid shirt, slung an axe over his shoulder, and humped up this mountain with help in his heart and butter in his pocket, you would have a pretty good picture of Jim. I sighed down a snowy eastern slope to spend another cold night with rats, grateful I've met him and that my feet are dry. The next morning, signs of spring sweeten the air. The about-to-burst buds scent in the valley hitchhike up the thermal drafts. I get a whiff of this as I haul buckets of water from the frisky creek to heat in the finicky old hungry stove. When I rise from the creek bank, a pale crescent of green is pressed out of the snow by the weight of my bent knee. All that afternoon, I work on perfecting my limbing with a double-bladed poleaxe purchased at the same flea market where I bought the bow saw. After a full day of whacking away tenuous tree limbs, my jeans are so stiff with pitch they stand on their own when I undress to bathe. I need a long soak in a hot tub. Instead, I settle for a sponging off quickly of flashed body parts in tepid water heated on the stove. Afterwards, I dress in long underwear, a sweater, and clean jeans. The sleeping bag snug over my shoulders, I pull a relatively dry tree stump I found outside, close to the open fire. I sit on it, and by candlelight, I write letters and nibble on cheese and crackers the rats have left for me. Then on to my homework, not the kind to earn credit. I'm behind in my college assignments because I'm more interested in Jim notes, my ideas, and cross-referencing both with my books, How to Build Your Home in the Woods, and Butt, Cut, Saddle, V-Notch or Dovetail, End, Sod, Flash, or Flesh, or Axe, Cut, Foundation, Post and Beam, Pier, Post and Beam, Shed, Roof, Gable Roof, How Long, How Tall, Facing north or south. Jim's pencil drawings are more precise as the drawings in my book, both at this point a foreign language I'm trying to gasp. I study in the light of a single candle and open the stove grate until both burn low and I bed down on the cold cabin floor. The next afternoon, I rent a post office box, then mail letters and postcards with the P.O. address to my sister, brother, and grandfather, a high school friend named Roxy, and my attorney, Harriet. I also send a change of address card to the Social Security Administration, never expecting to receive more than an update from my attorney and a monthly check. I hooked the mailbox key to my Gremlin key. Remember Gremlin, the little car I drove? I hook it to my Gremlin keychain and twirl it around my finger as I walk around the block, then down the street to Emery's, the only place in town where I'm known on a first-name basis. Hi, Yvonne. Emery greets me as I take a counter seat. I don't care about the mispronunciation because at least it means I am recognized, and that sounds fine to me. Jim find you all right? Yes, he did, despite the bad weather. Emery tops off my cut. I add cream and sugar, lots of both. Couldn't figure why he'd be working outside in that cold and wet. He stopped by on his way to your place, though, and asked if he could buy some butter. Butter? I bite into my first fritter. Yep, butter. 4 pats worth. I just give him the butter. Just take it, I say. 4 pieces of butter ain't gonna break me. Emery refills my cup with coffee. I imagine it is brewed from 1 bean and reused on a second pot. He insisted on paying for that butter, though. Left a nickel, put the butter in his pocket, and walked out. Next to the communal jar of raspberry jam on the countertop is a little crockery bowl filled with papered butter pats. I look at this dish, then down at the greasy boots wrapping my dry feet, and marvel at the simple ingenuity used to satisfy a basic need. Thanks for listening to Chapter 8. Next week we're going to get into Chapter 9. Make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel, please, Yvonne Wakefield. Remember, stay hydrated, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.